Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. I am so excited for you to hear today's interview with Dr. Lee. He has some wonderful information about healing the body with food from the medical standpoint. I know you're going to love it. If you want to learn how to cook really healthy, delicious, healing foods, come join my membership. You'll also be supporting the Learn True Health podcast, and you'll be learning from me and my friend Naomi. We're all really great in the kitchen, focusing on using foods that heal the body and integrating them into your diet. Go to learntruehealth.com/home kitchen. That's learntruehealth.com/home kitchen and enjoy all the wonderful and delicious videos and recipes and lessons there, because we love to use the kitchen as our pharmacy to heal the body and prevent disease. And I know you're going to love learning some great tips today on the foods that you can eat and drink to support your overall health with Dr. Lee. Enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 432. I am so excited for today's guest. We have Dr. William Lee on the show, a best-selling author of Eat to Beat Disease. He has an amazing TED Talk, Can We Eat to Starve Cancer? I love it. It has over 11 million views. You are a scientist first and a doctor. And we've had a wonderful discussion before we hit record on COVID. So I'm interested in your, in everything that, all the science that you've been pouring through, any advice that you can give to us on staving off disease, which is what your specialty is. Welcome to the show. This is going to be a really interesting discussion.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It's really a pleasure to be here, and certainly an interesting time in history. Generations from now, people will be referring back to 2020 as that time. And the difference between now, that time, and the medieval ages where people were running, from the plague and other deadly health scourges is that we really have a lot of science to put wind in our sails. And I think that's really how we're going to dig our way out of the mess we're in right now, which is to use science to find the way.
We need to find the science and look at that. And I think what's going on is we're listening to the interpretations of the science and the predictions. We're listening to a lot of predictions, which end up, I don't know what's going on, but there's a lot of fear mongering, and I would love for people to be grounded in the science instead of grounded in their fear, because we want to empower people to take appropriate steps to remain healthy. But being in fear mode is actually harmful for the immune system, which is, that's the thing we have to avoid is staying in that fear mode.
Well, that's right. So I'm a physician, internal medicine. I'm a scientist. I study blood vessels. I'm a vascular biologist and an author. So I wrote a book called Eat to Beat Disease. And, one of the things that I started my career doing is, like every other medical researcher, studying disease and trying to understand what makes diseases different from one another. And then I started to realize that studying common denominators that united different diseases could be really a powerful way to really make advances, because if we could pull the bow back and send a single arrow through the common denominators of disease and of health, we could actually make a lot more progress. And so, what you're talking about, which is that fear, which is a really primitive response, right? It's hardwired in our brain, whether it's a spider or a rattlesnake or a saber-toothed tiger, our fear nerve endings allow us to actually react smartly to get out of the way of something that could be damaging. But the problem that we're all having right now with COVID-19 is that there's really no break from this right now.
It's constant.
This virus came out of the blue, took everybody by surprise, and put an entire civilization down on its knees. every country, more than 180 different countries have been affected, pretty much organized economies around the world. I mean, there may be some aboriginals in, the jungles of Borneo or Brazil that are actually just going about their way. But I think every other organized modern society has had to pause. And when you pause, you're actually more heightened to your emotions, and emotions of
Mm.
fear really have to do with uncertainty, lack of knowledge, lack of the feeling of lack of control. And that's really where I think science helps us, because the more we study something we don't know, the more confident we are that we can actually um, uh, uh, navigate our own position with that threat that we are just starting to understand. And I think that's coming true with COVID-19 as well. What started as this, mystery illness from bat to, wet market to human to air passenger, and around the world, we're beginning to really throw down the tools of biotechnology and medical research to understand not only what is the virus like, but what does it do in our body. And as we're beginning to understand that, we started to realize some interesting things. First of all, COVID-19 is a coronavirus, and coronavirus is the same kind of virus that causes the common cold. And so it's very different than the influenza virus, which causes the flu. And so, lots of misconceptions out there that, oh, this is just like a bad flu. In fact, it's not even related to the flu. It's more related to the common cold. Imagine if a common cold were potentially lethal. That's really what we're dealing with. And again, even that piece of understanding makes us allows us to actually put pieces into their place as we kind of start getting deeper and deeper. So one of the things that I am doing as a COVID-19 researcher is trying to get to the bottom of what do we know, what are the facts about this disease, and what possible ways do we have to protect ourselves, to thwart the damage it can cause. And then, for people that are actually sick and maybe have recovered, how do we actually repair and heal ourselves more quickly?
Well, I'm really looking forward to you diving into that and sharing with us how we can prevent it and what we can do to support the body in mounting a healthy response if we do come in contact with it, and how to then recover quickly. Um, what I've seen in the last week is interesting information coming out of Italy. A pathologist was doing autopsies on over 20 people who passed away in the hospital of COVID, and they saw that there was a similarity that they all had blood clots in the lungs. And he says that it's not pneumonia, that it's causing blood clots in the lungs. And so our approach to treating it is all wrong, that we should be treating it with blood thinners and antiviral, anti-inflammatories. Have you seen this? Have you seen any science to support this? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually know a lot about this because that's exactly in my wheelhouse. So my background is in vascular biology. I study blood vessels, which allow blood to flow, or when they're damaged, blood to clot, which is clotting is a good thing. If you're wounded, you want the bleeding to stop. It's a bad thing if you're not wounded and blood clots in your body, and then you can't get oxygen or nutrients to the rest of your cells in your body, and then you wind up having big problems. And so that's something that I have studied a lot. Look, here's a picture of what we're putting together, and it's not black or white, either or. One person's right, one person's wrong. What I would tell you is that COVID-19 is a coronavirus, like the cold virus. It's a respiratory virus, and we become infected by breathing it in. And if you think about breathing in a virus and how easy it is to catch the cold, you can kind of see how infectious this COVID-19 can be, which is one of the reasons of trying to wear masks, is because if everybody wore a mask, then we would be cutting down the likelihood that the droplets, the water droplets that the virus hangs out in, would actually leave our mouths. And that would be yours and mine if we were in the same place at the same time. So we would be less likely to infect each other. And so mask wearing actually, which was really confusing for a while, is now becoming so obvious how important it actually is. In most of the countries like Taiwan or Korea or Singapore, Hong Kong, are now beginning to demonstrate with real scientific evidence that wearing masks is not really just it's not lip service, so to speak. It's actually cutting down the risk of transmission. So this airborne virus, we breathe in, can block it with a mask, but if you breathe it in, where does the virus go? Like a cold virus, it actually goes into the mucus in your nose. That mucus is what you blow into a handkerchief or a Kleenex. And our mucus in our nose is full of antibodies. So we actually, they're called IgA. It's kind of like the non-specific defense antibody, line of first defense. And, probably for COVID, a lot of the battle is fought and won right there in your nose, just like the regular cold virus. But this thing is kind of sneaky and it's pretty aggressive. And if it manages to get through your mucus and into your the mucous membranes, the cells in your nose, it starts to be able to track into your body. And we do know that it goes down to your lungs. When it's in your lungs, let me be very clear, we do know that it causes a pneumonia. Although it's not the classic pneumonia you would get with a bacteria, it's a viral pneumonia. And so, that basically means, an organism is causing massive inflammation and a response and causing an interruption of your airflow. So there's no question this thing actually causes a pneumonia. And when it actually causes a pneumonia, most people get over it, but some people actually, they succumb, or their breathing gets worse and worse. And for the people that are unable to make it back home, make it at home, they have to be admitted to the hospital. And some percentage of those people actually wind up really crashing, and they need to go on a ventilator to have artificial support of their breathing, hopefully until their body actually is able to overcome the attack of the virus. So, this is an epic battle between the virus and our bodies. And when our bodies start to win, we can get off the ventilator, we can leave the hospital, we can go back home. And hopefully if we win early enough, meaning like the security in our host is really, really solid, we won't even go to the hospital at all. We might have something even as mild as a cold or a little bit of a syndrome, viral syndrome, and not downright crash. What you're hearing from Italy is now being seen around the world and verified by the research I'm actually doing. I've also looked at autopsy tissue from people who have died of COVID-19 and gone way deep to take a look at what is actually going on. And what we are seeing is something really amazing. When the virus gets into your lungs, in addition to causing pneumonia, one of the first things it does, it makes a beeline for the blood vessels in your lungs. And when it gets into the blood vessel lining, it causes that lining to be damaged. It damages that lining, which makes anytime a blood vessel has damaged lining, it becomes what we call prothrombotic, or more likely to clot. And then the blood vessels kind of go into a tizzy, trying to recover from the blood clot, and they start to respond in ways that make the blood more sluggish. The immune response tries to clear out the virus in the blood vessels. The blood vessels get damaged as kind of a collateral response. Think about the SWAT team, trying to rescue some hostages in a bank, and there's a lot of bank robbers there, and when you're trying to rush the bank, some of the hostages wind up getting killed. This is the kind of thing that also happens with our immune system. And so it's not that we have an autoimmune response, it's that we have the right immune response. It's just that it takes out a lot of healthy tissue along the way. We think that contributes to even further likelihood for blood clotting. And when blood clots in your lungs, in small blood vessels, which is what you're seeing, it becomes a problem because now even if you're moving air in and out, you're not getting that oxygen from the air into your blood vessels to deliver to the rest of your body. And so we're beginning to see how these clots are actually responsible for some of the problems of breathing and circulation that we've observed. And of course, now we're seeing blood clots in the lung and the brain, in other parts of your body as well. So this respiratory virus does cause a respiratory infection. So that's for sure. But what we now know is that this respiratory infection, the virus goes further to cause a whole body, a systemic illness. And that's really where we are right now. I mean, that kind of takes the research to present day, where we're now diving even deeper into understanding what's actually happening in all these other different parts and organs of the body, including the blood vessels.
So if a patient has the infection, should they be put on a blood clotting drug to prevent the clots? Should like anticoagulants be used preventively as their body's fighting this virus?
You know, an article came out in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology 2 weeks ago showing that people who are in the hospital who are on anticoagulants and infected with COVID definitely had a better outcome. And so now, based on that observation, which makes sense with the research that we were just talking about how the virus causes blood clotting, now the studies are being done to actually put people proactively on blood thinners to protect them. And an interesting question is, if you're infected at home, should you be taking a blood thinner like an aspirin?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, that's an over-the-counter medicine. Anybody can go to a drugstore to pick up an aspirin. But, like anything, medicines can have effects and side effects.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that's happening in this, the pandemic of the virus, that's leading to a pandemic of fear, is leading people to actually just knee jerk and trying to go out to buy everything they can and try to self-minister. And again, this is where teaming up with your doctor and having medical researchers work on this is really important. Even something as simple as an aspirin, which may indeed be life-saving in this particular case with COVID, can cause stomach bleeding, can cause other side effects. And so I'm one of the doctors that basically, I don't discourage my patients, people that I know, from taking their health into their own hands with things that are as safe as food, for example, or even dietary supplements. But when it comes to medicines, really, I think it's important to track along, follow along with real medical researchers, because it's only through the data that we get from science that we can actually know if what we're doing has more benefits than risks.
The people that were in the hospital that the journal wrote about, were they already on blood thinners, or were they put on blood thinners because they were infected?
Most of the first reports were basically for people that were already on blood
Okay.
thinners. There's a lot of people that are already on blood thinners. For example, if you had a heart condition like atrial fibrillation, or if you had a valve replaced where you need your blood to be thin, many of those people are walking around on blood thinners all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever had a stroke in the past, you probably were put on a blood thinner. So lots of reasons that people actually are on blood thinners. And of course, there's some genetic conditions where people are kind of extra clotty, so they wind up on blood thinners as well. So I think, this is where the science of observation, so even observation can be a science, but the science of observation is really picking up patterns, and I think that this is where being alert in a situation that is foreign to us, this is called a novel coronavirus because humans have been walking around for 200,000 years, and we've never encountered something like this. And there's no way you can Google all the answers, there's no Wikipedia page that tells us everything. So we're learning as we go along. making observations, doing the research, going to the deep dive. We're much better now than we were uh, a month ago, and definitely much better than we were 4 months ago when all this started to break. So I think it's a very, very important advance to understand the importance of making sure blood doesn't clot in people who are infected with COVID-19.
My friend's father is in the hospital currently. He's had 4 brain surgeries because unfortunately his doctor had him on aspirin and a blood thinner after a heart surgery he had for a valve a year ago. And he had massive headaches a few months ago, went into the ER, and the ER doctor said, "You're having a brain bleed. We have to get you into the emergency surgery right now." And that doctor said, "I can't believe your cardiologist has you on like this amount of blood thinner and an aspirin. This is what caused your brain bleed." And they took him off of the aspirin. They reduced his blood thinners after retesting his clotting factors, and he is still having brain bleeds. And so they're chasing the with several procedures. So I mean that's an example of, if you're on too much of a blood thinner, you can have a major problem. So we wouldn't want to just arbitrarily get on a blood thinner, like you said. Definitely want to work closely with a doctor. I'm wondering though if someone who's has COVID could then be given a blood thinner, and if that would be fast enough to kick in, um, and if there's any evidence to show that as of yet.
Uh, so I think that's what's going on right now. We don't know yet. I would tell you that if you were concerned about it, to talk to your doctor. I imagine that this is going to be one of the recommendations in the future. If you can document that you've got the infection and you have risks that might set up for a blood clot, that the medical community will recommend that you go on a blood thinner. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably right around the corner. What's interesting when it comes to diet and lifestyle, um, there's a school of thought that foods that contain vitamin K, like spinach and kale and many other greens, that can thin the blood, it might not be good for all people to take. But here's a situation where it might be actually beneficial to eat more foods, more whole green plant-based foods that actually contain vitamin K, to keep you not only healthier from all the other good stuff, the bioactives that plants have, but also as a additional benefit that they might be able to keep our blood a little bit thinner.
Well, and this is the funny part, is he eats a whole food plant-based diet. He eats tons of vegetables, tons of leafy
Hmm.
greens. And they brought this up to his cardiologist and his neurosurgeon, and said, or vascular surgeon. I'm not sure what the classification is for the person who's working on closing up the vessels that are bleeding in his brain. They brought this up to his doctors, and they said, "Listen, he eats a whole food plant-based diet," and they'd never heard of that. They didn't know what that was, and they had to explain how he ate, and they said, "Oh, well, that just sounds like eating healthy." And so his family said, "Well, this is a diet that thins the blood naturally." And his doctors said, "Diet has nothing to do with this. You can't affect the body with food. You can't affect blood vessels with food." I mean, I was just kind of floored, but so many doctors think this way, that you can't affect blood clotting or even the health of the brain or the blood vessels with eating.
To some extent, you can't blame doctors who haven't been educated, and nutrition has really, until recently, not been a part of medical education, or not adequately part of it. One of the reasons that I got into food as medicine, and I'm one of the people that are actually doing the research to study foods just the same way that we would study medicine, with a lot of rigor, and using the same type of testing systems, is because, look, I was taking care of patients at a veterans hospital. Some of my favorite patients were people that used to serve the country in the armed services, and they would receive these really terrible diagnoses from me. And they were in their 60s and 70s and 80s. Many of them were overweight, or had cancer, or heart disease, or diabetes, all kinds of problems. And after I gave them the diagnosis and wrote the prescriptions and gave them referrals to the other specialists, a lot of these guys would put on their jacket and walk out the door, and I would turn around to do my notes, and they would turn back and come and pop their head in the door and say, "Hey, doc, one more thing. What should I eat? Is there something I can do for myself?" And at that moment, I started realizing that, I didn't have the answer to that because I was never taught that. And that just seemed wrong to me. And that set me really on this journey to understand how does diet actually work and what answers could we be giving people when they have that when they need to know. The other thing that was interesting, I thought, from my experience at the Veterans Administration is, some of these people that were terribly in terrible shape, out of shape and in terrible shape, they might be morbidly obese and just like, really their bodies were a wreck. Let's say in their 60s or 70s, I realized when they were in their 20s, they were the cut, fit, buff, perfect specimens that they couldn't even get into armed services in the military unless they were in perfect shape. So what the heck happened, right? Between the time of 18 or 20 and the age 60, really is diet and lifestyle. And so that really only underscored for me the importance to really dig deeper and try to answer that. So not surprisingly, this is not the typical experience of most medical doctors. And I really believe that food as medicine is a concept whose time has come. I think more and more the medical community realizes how important it is. The older doctors who've been out there longer, who definitely weren't taught this in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, they're struggling with the idea, even though each of them do know on a personal level how important diet could be. They just don't have the intellectual framework to know what to do with their own instincts. And so this is getting back to basics in some ways, but now applying science to it. We ought to be able to make people more confident in understanding how food can be medicine.
I love it. I love it. So how have you changed your lifestyle? How have you changed your diet after diving into all the research?
Well, I'm a little bit of an unusual creature because between college and medical school, I did a gap year. And in my gap year, I went to the Mediterranean long before the Mediterranean diet was popular. And what I was interested in was the Mediterranean diet. And I was interested in sort of how foods in a particular part of the world shaped culture, and how that culture actually helped to inform the way that arts and sciences emerged from history. And that was I was always interested in the history of regions. I was interested in the history of the Mediterranean and of Asia, and trying to understand how do these old cultures, how did people live in the land, grow and assemble their foods into meals that today are regarded as amazingly delicious combinations and healthy too, to boot. And how did that kind of life and lifestyle help shape things like painting and drawing and sculpture and mathematics and physics and biology? It was an interesting thing. I went to Europe. I lived there in Italy and in Greece, and I was exploring diets. Again, this is long before anybody really knew what a Mediterranean diet was, and I was living. I was living it. I wasn't talking the talk. I was just walking the walk back then. So for decades, I've actually lived a pretty Mediterranean style life. I have an Asian background, so I grew up eating a lot of Asian inspired cuisines. So here's I'll tell you what is the common denominator of these old, ancient, healthy cuisines. They all tend to rely mostly on whole plant-based foods as their backbone. They tend to be use fresh foods as opposed to a lot of prepared foods. There are very little ultra-processed foods involved in their diet. Uh, um, Fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds are common. Fish, not just salmon, but all kinds of fish, mostly seafood. fish and shellfish also are common along the coastline, as you might expect, and very little meat. Not the absence of meat. I mean, some people don't realize this, but the Sardinians, which is one of the blue zones where people routinely live to above 100, the villages of the Sardinian blue zone are in the mountains where nowhere near the sea. And they eat a fair amount of meat too. I mean, they eat meat. So one of the things is that it's a very naturalistic integration of plants that are easy to grow, seasonal, eaten fresh, cooked in combinations, including incorporating different ingredients that are tasty, make you want to eat more, and diversity of cuisine. I would say between the Mediterranean and Asia, those are the common denominators. And so I've really just embarked on that type of a lifestyle for I don't know, last 20, 30 years. And it makes me feel great.
What isn't in your diet that's in the standard American diet?
Well, look, I mean, I grew up in America, so I grew up probably eating the same stuff that everyone has eaten. Stuff out of boxes. I've had a Twinkie. I'm ashamed to say it. When I was a kid, right? I mean, I wouldn't have one now, but I certainly had them when I was growing up. I will tell you what I'm very careful to avoid. I don't eat a lot of meat. I try to cut down or cut out red meat. I try to stay away from processed meats of any sort. I try not to eat foods that come out of boxes. I do look at ingredients, and when I shop for things, and if I see a whole bunch of Greek and Latin words that referring to chemicals, I try to stay away from the ultra processed stuff. If I have a choice between having something that is pre-made versus freshly made, I will go hands down for the fresh stuff. And by the way, I would say the other thing that I tend not to do is really do a lot of errant snacking, is what I call it. We know that actually restricting your calories is actually healthy. It reprimes your immune system. It actually slows down your cellular aging. It lowers inflammation, helps fight cancer by cutting off the blood supply. So lots of things that caloric restriction does, and that's the opposite of, let's call it, the Vegas buffet mindset. Let's go in there and stuff our face. So the other thing I don't do is I really don't. I live a life where, if I miss a meal or two because I'm busy or I'm doing something else, I'm okay with that, and I don't try to make it up by stuffing my face. Those are some of the things that I kind of don't do. I really don't do fast food. Like I said, I grew up, I'm doing that kind of stuff, but I can't remember the last time that I went to a drive-through or picked up fast food. I would rather not eat, and I'm okay with that. I'll find something healthier when I get home.
Your mission is to teach people how to use food as medicine. The number one killer is heart disease. That's the number one. I mean, it's heart disease is going to kill more people than all infection combined. And yet we focus so much on worrying about infection when most people statistically will die of heart disease. What can we do to prevent heart disease?
Well, heart disease is really interesting because it's really not just about the heart. It's about the blood vessels supplying the heart. And that's and that comes from my field of angiogenesis, or how the body grows healthy blood vessels. So the heart, of course, is part of the circuitry, part of the plumbing of our blood vessels. But most people don't know that there's 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our bodies. So think about, a ball of yarn that's 60,000 miles long. Literally, if you unspool that yarn, you could have a string that would wrap around the earth twice, right? So that's your blood vessels, that's your garden hose in your body. And our heart, which is the pumping machine, actually just really jets out oxygen and nutrients through our blood to every single cell in our body. If it has any problem, kind of sending out that oxygen and nutrients, then the heart winds up struggling. If it can't pump, you wind up having heart disease. And there's a lot of ways that the heart can have trouble. For example, the muscle can get weakened by itself. The blood vessels feeding the heart can get clogged, and then the vessels, the circulation that the heart pumps blood into can go from being kind of soft and elastic to being really hard and rigid. And imagine, trying to blow into, a long metal pipe. You know how hard that is. Well, if your blood vessels are really hardened, the heart has to work really, really hard, which tires it out, wears it down, and causes it to actually eventually fail. So all that means that to prevent heart disease, we need to take good care of our blood vessels, prevent them from actually getting hardened, prevent them from clogging up, and make sure that the cells lining our blood vessels are as healthy as possible. Sleep, exercise, lowering stress, staying away from smoking, not drinking in excess, physical activity, all those things are the common sense things. When it comes to food, here's really where some really interesting research is happening. We used to think about heart health and our diet as cutting things out. No butter, no meat, no this, no that. You're a bad person if you eat that. If you've got heart disease, you got to cut out everything right away, right? It was really kind of like a guilt, fear, shame mindset, a elimination program if you wanted to avoid heart disease. Now what we know with science is that if you want to protect your heart and you want to avoid heart disease, it's really you should be adding things to your diet. Yeah, sure. Stay away from the bad stuff, but really focus on the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We want to have good fiber in our diet, because good fiber feeds our gut microbiome, and our healthy gut bacteria actually helps when our gut bacteria are healthy because we're feeding it fiber. Those bacteria digest the fiber, and as part of the byproducts of the bacteria's own digestion, the metabolites, they create particles that actually lower our cholesterol, which then prevents our blood vessels from getting hardened. They actually help our body metabolize cholesterol and sugar better, so we even be able to use our glucose, our blood glucose, better. It's kind of like, our bacteria sort of is like our diabetes preventer. And so eating plant-based foods with a lot of fiber is super healthy for your heart. We also know that there are foods that, believe it or not, can actually help the lining of our blood vessels regenerate themselves and continuously repair themselves, so they're not quite as clotty. They don't clog up, or they don't clot up quite as much. And some of these things are, for example, omega-3 fatty acids, which you can find in nuts. You can find them in seafood, but you can also find them in nuts. You can also take it as a dietary supplement. A surprise would be cacao, dark chocolate. The cocoa bean actually is used to make cacao. Cacao is the basis for making chocolate. Dark chocolate is where you have mostly cacao. That's Mother Nature's blood vessel helper. And what's amazing is there's been a study that was done on individuals who had heart disease. This was out of UCSF, where they gave two groups either a placebo drink, or they gave people hot chocolate made with dark cacao. And the placebo, by the way, had just the flavonols, the polyphenols were low in the chocolate. So it's got low versus high. And then they fed the people with known heart disease just 2 cups of hot chocolate a day for 30 days. And then they measured the number of stem cells in their bloodstream at baseline and compared it to the end of 30 days of drinking 2 cups of hot cocoa made with dark cocoa. And they found that the people who had the dark chocolate version of hot cocoa had double the number of regenerating blood vessel cells, stem cells in their bloodstream, and they had better blood flow as well. So again, human studies, plant-based foods, heart healthy, these are the kinds of things that we should be leaning into and embracing. And so now I think it's for heart health, it's all about leaning into the good stuff, while keeping in mind we need to kind of cut down on the bad stuff as well.
I love it. I love it. Uh, there's a school of thought that consuming mass amounts of virgin olive oil is very, very healthy for the body. And just like the Mediterranean diet, every time we think of the Mediterranean diet, we think of drinking gallons a year of olive oil. And then there's a school of thought that we should not consume any oil once it's been processed away from the plant. So we should eat olives, not the olive oil. For example, Dr. Cadwell Esselstyn, who's a cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, says that oil harms the endothelial lining, which is like the skin on the inside of the blood vessels, and he sees that consuming oil and fat harms it, or animal fat harms it, inflames it, and that we should eat our fat from a whole food source and not from a processed source. What's your have you sided with either side, or what does the science say for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to look at this. First of all, consuming anything in gallon form is probably not good for you.
Right.
So my first kind of position is on most things when it relates to food is that more is not necessarily more. There's actually a concept, a biological concept called hormesis, which describes this, which is that a little bit isn't enough, a little bit more is good for you, even more is even better, and then a little bit more than that kind of gives you the optimal amount. But then you get more, if then you keep on adding more, you start losing the benefits, and you keep on adding more, even more than that, you start losing it. So it's this sort of it's the classic upside down U-shaped curve where there's an optimal amount where you get the optimal benefit, but if you keep on going beyond that, you actually kind of lose it. Um, I know Caldwell Esselstyn. He's an amazing guy, a friend, and we worked together on a couple of projects. And really smart, and I think he's right. You do not want to damage the lining of your blood vessels. I mean, that's my field of angiogenesis as well.
Hmm.
But here's what I will tell you: not all oils are created equal. Saturated fats are clearly more damaging to the blood vessel lining, the endothelial lining of our blood vessels. And polyunsaturated fats have less damage. Now, obviously, if you go too high in concentrations, I mean, anything is bad for you in excess, right? So, but olive oils are polyunsaturated for the most part, and it has less to do with the processing. If you think about it, eating an olive off of out of a barrel is a plant-based food, but it's packed with olive oil, right? So a little bit of olive oil, such as you would use in a dressing or use in cooking, not bad for you. And actually, most of the studies have shown that if you actually have up to about 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day, that's probably okay, or less. And if you have it using olive oil in the cooking, you're probably in good shape. And don't forget, it's not about the fat that's the good stuff in olive oil. It's the fat of olive oil is less bad for you. But in fact, olive oil has these bioactive compounds like oleic acid and hydroxytyrosol. These are some of Mother Nature's kind of secret weapons that happen to be found in plant-based foods. And for example, hydroxytyrosol has been shown to be one of those olive oil derived substances that can actually improve your immune response.
Mm.
And so, that's, in this COVID-19 era, we pay attention to things like that when we hear something is good. So, the next time you're actually sauteing something, I would say it's okay to use a little bit of olive oil. Don't take too much of it. Never have gallons of anything.
You said someone could be safe taking up to 3 tablespoons a day. What if someone does more than that? Could they be damaging their blood vessels? And is there a way to get all those great nutrients in a different form? Because you're saying olive oil really isn't a great way to get fat. You're not actually taking the olive oil for the fat. You're taking it for the medicinal extracts from olives. Whereas it would be more concentrated in an olive itself, wouldn't it?
Uh, it could be, and by the way, a lot of the good stuff in olive oil, in olives, actually is in not the oily part of it, it's in the liquid part of it. Which, when you press an olive to make olive oil, what comes out of an olive is a liquid, which then is drained away, but the fat actually floats to the top, and that's what's collected. But in fact, there's a lot of really great stuff in the olive water that gets strained away. So that's a whole other,
Olive juice.
sustainability issue. Yeah,
Why
exactly.
aren't
I
we
mean,
drinking
you
olive
know,
juice by the gallon?
I love olive juice. Have you ever had it, by the way? It's just fantastic. It's super concentrated olives. It's like all the goodness of olive without the fat.
Oh my
Now, I'm not
gosh.
saying that I'm actually not saying that olive oil is a bad fat. What I'm saying is that it's actually a pretty decent fat, all things considered. If you, by the way, if you look at clinical trials and if you look at population studies, people who eat olive oil, people who live in regions where olive oil tends to be the predominant fat tend to be a little bit healthier, and the correlate between in consuming olive oil is healthier than not consuming olive oil. So you're asking, though, are there any other ways of getting healthy fats? I mean, look, many nuts and flax seeds all contain healthy fats. I mean, we probably shouldn't be having a ton of fats to begin with. There's no food that is really just only the fat, right? There's other things that are good with it. And so we have to kind of take a more considered approach to what we're putting in. For example, if you're having olive oil, it's not just the polyunsaturated fats you're having, you're also getting all these other bioactives. If you're having a saturated fat, there's probably nothing good that you're taking in with it.
Got it. And so this olive juice, this olive water, olive the extract that's not the fat, that's where all the polyphenols are, all these chemicals that you're talking about. How would one go about getting this into their life? Just by eating olives, or is there a place to buy olive juice?
It's a great question. I know that I was traveling once in the Mediterranean, and there was a an olive, for the lack of a better word, an olive bar. I'm trying to remember where it was, but it was amazing. You could get little shots of pure olive juice from different types of olives, and I'll tell you, it was just such an amazing treat to sample that. So yeah, be on the lookout. I mean, I suppose if you have time in a lockdown mode to actually try out different baking recipes, maybe we should try to make our own olive juice. I'm sure there's a way of actually
Right,
doing
right.
it.
If everyone's, yeah, there's a ton of people baking right now. We should be like cold pressing olives and drinking the juice instead. That sounds delicious and so nutritious. I'm predicting in the next 20 years that's going to be a big health trend, like goji berries and kale. We're gonna have olive juice, little bottles of olive juice. That's really cool. So what you focus on food as medicine, you focus on preventing disease, because it's more important to prevent a disease than treat it. At least we have more tools to prevent a disease than we do to have to treat it, because by the time someone is so sick that they have the disease, it's much harder to reverse it. What actionable steps could we take today? Like, what specific steps would you tell us to start doing today to prevent disease?
Well, the one thing that everyone needs to know is that we actually have, when from the time we're born, all the defensive weapons we need to live long, healthy lives. So our body really craves health. Health is not just the absence of disease; it's really a result of our own body's hardwired health defense systems working as hard as they can. I call it firing on all cylinders from the time we're born until our very last breath. And some people say, well, I know somebody who developed cancer or heart disease. Why did they develop that? Right. Well, I would turn it around to say, why don't more people develop cancer, and why don't more people develop and diabetes or heart disease? Well, it's because when our body's defenses are working at full capacity, full throttle, um, they naturally resist cancer growth, metabolism going on haywire, blood vessels clogging up, causing heart disease, actually even fat cells growing to ridiculous sizes. Our body kind of knows how to do what it wants to do. The problem is that once we're born and we're living on planet Earth, life itself exacts a toll. Like the tax we pay for living on this planet is that we're continuously assaulted by ultraviolet radiations from the sun. Modern life, we're surrounded by off-gassing from furniture and carpets, and I always tell, like, this damages our DNA and causes all kinds of problems. I always tell people, like, if you still drive a car that uses petrol or uses gasoline, and you get out to fill your tank, do you stand upwind or downwind? And a lot of people go, I never even thought about that. How about you, Ash? Do you actually stand upwind or downwind from filling up your
I
tank?
sit in the car while my husband does it.
All right, the smartest one of them all. Um, but if you, I'll tell you what I do. I stand upwind, and because if I realize that if I stand downwind and I can smell that gas, those solvents are actually going into my lung, damaging my own DNA. Something like that, just even a small thing like that, is an assault on your body. And so the question is, well, how come we don't have lung cancer every day after, or the next day after or the next week after we fill up a tank of gas? Because our body fixes itself. So number one thing I think is super important is that our body already has the secret to actually stay healthy. Number two is that those defenses have to work harder and harder as we get older, because there's so many cumulative stresses that we're subjected to, and our body's defenses have to work harder, and sometimes they can break down. The third thing I would tell you, so you want to sort of stay away from those dangers, right? This is like wear the sunscreen, stay physically active, avoid solvents and toxins, but there's even more, which is that we can actually do our health defenses a favor by feeding them, because foods can activate and support and even enhance our health defense system. So what are those health defense systems? Well, I wrote about 5 of them in my book, Eat to Beat Disease. There's angiogenesis, our circulation, that's 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels that deliver oxygen to all of our cells. There's our stem cells, the regeneration. We talked about regeneration a little bit. All our stem cells are actually found in our bone marrow. We got tons of them even as adults. And when we were kids, we were told that starfish and salamanders regenerate, but people don't. Humans don't. Well, that playbook's been thrown out. We have a new chapter written, and we know that humans do regenerate very, very slowly. And so foods can actually make that regeneration happen from the inside out, and we can speed it up and make it more efficient. Our microbiome, gut bacteria, we've got 37 trillion bacteria in our gut. In our bodies, and most of it's in our gut. And we used to think, when I was in medical school, I was taught, oh, bacteria are bad, kill the bacteria, prescribe the antibiotics. And now we know, in fact, most of the bacteria in our body is good. Occasionally, there's kind of like a bad actor that calls itself out, and sometimes you need to actually, bust out the pharmaceutical police to take care of that. But for the most part, we have a good ecosystem of healthy good bacteria. And by feeding our good bacteria, it affects our mood, our brain, our emotions, our immune system, how good our skin looks, how fast we heal, whether or not we've got inflammation, our metabolism. So important is our bacteria that we actually realize that we're not even fully human anymore, because we got 39 trillion human cells, we got 37 trillion bacteria. So we're like 50-50. Like half of us isn't even human. And by the way, Ashley, the term for an organism that's made up of different species, like we are, humans and bacteria, is called a holobiont, HOLOBIONT. So that's what you and I are. We're all holobionts. We're an ecosystem walking around. The bacteria are just walking around inside our human shell. That's really important, and foods can actually boost that. DNA is another defense system. We're all taught that DNA is our genetic code and it makes proteins. Absolutely. There's no, that's true. There's no quarrel about that. But many people did not realize that our DNA is a defense mechanism that protects us against environmental damage. So, for example, we know that if you go out to the beach and lay out, you'll get tan and you'll get burned if you stay out too long. And if you get burned, that can actually lead to skin cancer because it damages our DNA. We know, if you want to speed up that damage, you should go into a sun tanning booth and like bingo, in an hour you'll have done 20 years of damage to your skin. Really a bad thing to do. But did you know that actually even sitting in a car stuck in traffic on a beautiful day with the sun shining in through the windshield, or with your arm out the window coming in stuck in traffic, that also causes damage. Being in an airplane, pilots receive huge amounts of ultraviolet damaging radiation just by sitting in a cockpit flying the plane, as do the passengers. So the fact of the matter is our DNA knows how to fix itself. It repairs itself. It can rebuild itself when it's damaged. And our DNA is kind of a fuse, like a life fuse, that burns itself down in our cells, so that the longer the fuse is, the healthier and longer lived we are. And when our fuse burns down really short, they call these the telomeres, or the protective, they're like the caps of a shoelace at the very end, the plastic tips. What happens when your shoelace loses the cap? Your shoelace frays open and immediately it starts to fall apart. That can happen to our DNA. Our DNA protects ourselves against damage, including aging. And then finally, our immune system. Everybody now thinks about immunity as one of the most important defenses against COVID-19. But listen, we're surrounded by viruses and bacteria and molds all the time, and fungi all the time. And our immune system does more than resist attacks from the outside, which is what we're thinking about with COVID. Our immune system prevents us from being attacked from the inside by cancer cells. And in fact, we know that the immune system is so powerful that even if you were in your 80s or 90s, an elderly person, their immune system is powerful enough to completely wipe out cancer, even if it's spread, if you give it a chance. And we figured this out through, one of the biggest breakthroughs in medicine in the last, couple decades, which was immune therapy for cancer, where you can now treat some cancers, with medicines that don't actually kill the cancer cells directly. Instead, what they do is they actually help the immune system discover the cancer and get rid of it by itself. So great example is President Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States and one of the oldest living presidents now. He actually had melanoma. He was one of the most amazing people that after his presidency dedicated himself to building homes for people that needed to have homes constructed. So he and his wife, Rosalind, would go out and build houses and Habitat for Humanity. A lot of sunshine in the state of Georgia. Got a melanoma. It spread to his liver and his brain. And, it was thought that, someone in their 90s would never survive a melanoma that spread to the brain, but he got an immunotherapy in the 90s that didn't kill the cancer cells. All they did was rip open the cloak that cancers try to hide from your immune system. And his 90-year-old immune system said, aha, I see you. I'm going to get rid of you. And his own immune system wiped out all visible traces of cancer. Amazing. We never thought we'd see that happen, not my career, but here we are. So 5 defense systems: angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, DNA repair, and immunity. The great news is that our diet can be used to activate these, so you can, in fact, eat to beat disease.
I love it. I love it. And your book is just full of the science-based evidence showing us that every single time we walk into the kitchen, we're walking into our pharmacy. That every time we put something in our mouth, we can be healing our body or we could be harming our body. And we really want to maximize the nutrition, the nutrient density of every meal to support the body's ability to heal itself and maintain optimal health no matter what our age is. Through the more you dive into this and help people to shape their diet to support their overall health, what illnesses have you been surprised that were able to be reversed with diet?
Well, one of the most surprising is, in fact, cancer. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but um, I'll tell you the experience. This immune therapy that I told you about, immunotherapy, there's a bunch of different treatments that are out there like this. Even the best ones sometimes aren't effective, and we don't know why. So some people who actually wind up getting an immunotherapy will have this incredible, amazing, complete response back to baseline. They just regain their health back, and including from really like cancer, even after the cancer spread. On the other hand, some people don't respond at all. Kind of getting the treatment doesn't do them squat, diddly squat. So what's going on? Well, my colleague, Dr. Laurence Zitvogel in Paris, did this amazing, important study. She took 200 cancer patients who were being treated with immune therapies, and she just separated them out into people that actually had a good response and people who didn't respond. And then she dove deeply to figure out what the differences were between the people who were responders and non-responders. It seems like a really simple, logical thing to do, but in fact, it's quite a complicated thing if you really wanted to look for differences. And what she found when you accounted for sex, age, comorbidities, medications, other risk factors, diet, lifestyle, all kinds of other things. The only difference between someone who responded and didn't respond is one bacteria in their gut. One bacteria.
Wow.
And if you had that bacteria, you responded. And if you didn't have that bacteria, you didn't respond. And that bacteria is called Akkermansia muciniphila. And it's a normal, healthy gut bacteria that we now are beginning to realize actually governs and helps to control. It's like air traffic control for our immune system. It conducts surveillance. And here's the amazing thing about that bacteria. When she took out the bacteria from patients who were responders to the treatment and went to the lab to figure out if she took lab animals, mice, who actually didn't have any bacteria and put them in there. If she put a tumor on there and then treated them, same thing that she saw in patients, the immune therapy would allow the mouse's immune system to completely wipe out the cancer. If, on the other hand, she put the bacteria in there, the animal had a tumor and she gave it an antibiotic and wiped out that bacteria, no effect of the immune therapy. Okay, so powerful, powerful concept of a single bacteria helping your immune system function. But where's the surprise for me with when it comes to diet has to do with the fact that you cannot actually eat this bacteria. There's no probiotic for Akkermansia. The only thing you can do is to eat foods that actually cause your own gut, your own intestines to secrete the mucus that this bacteria loves to grow in.
Wow.
And if you and by the way, what is the food? Pomegranate juice, cranberry juice, Concord grape juice. They cause our colons to secrete mucus. And when that mucus is secreted, the Akkermansia loves to grow. It's like putting fertilizer into your garden. The flowers start blooming, and you can actually put yourself into a situation where you can then have the best possible chances of responding. So this isn't a food versus medicine. This is food and medicine. And to be able to get that kind of a impact from diet in a life and death situation, to me, was a delightful surprise.
Oh my gosh, that makes all the difference. It's funny, I Googled Akkermansia muciniphila. Is that how you say
Hmm.
it? I
Exactly.
Googled it, and the first thing that comes up is a bunch of probiotics. Um, but as you're saying, you don't want to take it, you don't want to take a probiotic, you want to eat food to support the gut and creating the environment that then this bacteria comes and lives. So does it have to be grape juice? Can you eat grapes, or grape juice is the best way to do it?
Well, so the studies have been done so far with grape juice. But obviously the juice is just coming from the grapes. You can also eat the grape too, and you get all the other good stuff that's good for other parts of your body, including your blood vessel health and metabolism. So,
Mm-hmm.
I always go for the whole food if you can get it,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can eat it. But the juice isn't a problem either. I would say, many people are concerned about the amount of sugar that's found in fruit juices. And what I would say is that number one, yes, sugar is found in some fruit juices, and yes, having too much sugar from any source is bad. But of sugar in a natural fruit juice is better than added sugar in a soda or in a cup of coffee. And so you kind of choose your choose your weapons, you choose your sugar wisely. The good thing about fruit is that you actually wind up having a lot of other good stuff that comes along with it. And if the sweetness of the fruit makes your mouth water and it makes you want to eat more of it, that's not a bad thing necessarily. So again,
Right.
moderation.
Moderation is key. It's interesting to know that fructose is the only carbohydrate, I believe, that will not trigger satiation. That's why someone can, an 18-year-old could consider drinking 2 liters of Coke, but they would never drink 2 liters of milk, like in one sitting. The fructose does not trigger that satiation, so people tend to want to binge on, or the brain wants to binge on fructose. It's part of our mechanism for when we were hunter gatherers. So it's just good to know for people who maybe have addictive tendencies, that when they start drinking juice or start eating even just fruit or any form of fructose, it can help to trigger more of their addictive tendencies. But
Hmm.
if you stay in moderation, like you said, everything in moderation. If someone drank a few ounces a day of cranberry juice, or which is very tart, I can't see anyone wanting to overconsume that. But you said Concord grapes, pomegranate juice, or cranberry juice, or someone could eat pomegranates, or it's kind of hard to eat cranberries unless they actually have made a really delicious cranberry relish
Oh
that
yeah.
didn't have any sugar in it. It was cranberries, raw cranberries diced with um, in a food processor with a bunch of orange and orange zest, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
very
Right.
delicious.
Yep. And if you were to put cranberries with some mango or cranberries with
Mm.
some banana, I'm trying to think of other things you could actually blend with cranberries. I think you could actually find other ways to sweeten it. You don't have to just do the old Thanksgiving recipe of dumping a cup of sugar with a cup of cranberries, as tasty as that might have been when you were a kid. Maple syrup's another kind of kinder, gentler way of actually putting a little bit of sugar in something. I know you're from Canada originally. It's the home of maple sugar,
Right, maple
maple
syrup
syrup.
courses through our veins.
Exactly. So you know, I think it's all about moderation.
Right, right. That's amazing. So you've seen people reverse cancer with diet, but this just understanding that those who consumed those foods so that their gut could have that bacteria, it made all the difference to them. Are there any other keys that you were really surprised to uncover?
Uh, you know, what was really amazing to me is that if you were to compare the potency of foods side by side with a cancer drug, or even a non-cancer drug, you can really get the sense of how powerful foods are. And we did this actually with green tea, where we, tested green tea in the same system for doing cancer drug development. We found that it was actually, it was as at least as active as about half the cancer treatments that we had tested. But what was also interesting, that was kind of a surprise to me, is that, when it comes to food and health, there's a lot of science, more science to be done, but there's also a lot of ideology, there's a lot of belief system, there's a lot of pride of thinking, that's out there, and sometimes that actually helps to that sometimes that confuses, that's confusing with science. And so what's interesting is most people would say that tea is good for you, and that green tea is really good for you, and that black tea might not be so good for you because it's been fermented, and it's a lot of the polyphenols have been um, been destroyed. But actually, we found in an angiogenesis assay that, in fact, oh, and then people will say with green tea, the Japanese tea is the best. When we actually were agnostic to, like, we had no ideology. We said, let's just test some green tea from Japan and other places like China, and let's test some black tea as well. A big surprise for me was we found that um, jasmine tea from China actually was more powerful in an angiogenesis assay for blood vessel health than Japanese tea. But even more surprising was that the black tea, Earl Grey, which is black tea with bergamot, which is kind of a type of citrus peel, was more potent than any of the green teas. And then what was even more surprising is when we did something like unthinkable culturally, which is to blend Japanese and Chinese tea together, we actually found that when you tested that combination, that was even more powerful than any of the teas.
Oh,
And so
wow.
it opened the ideas of food synergies, right? Because we know nobody eats food by
Mm.
itself. We really tend to mix things together. And so what don't we know? I mean, we know tomatoes are good for you. We know that olives are good for you. We know that, some spices and herbs are good for you. But do we know what happens when you mix them together? Does 1 + 1 = 10? That's the kind of research that lies ahead that I'm super excited to be doing.
Oh, absolutely. So what was the Japanese and Chinese combination that made the biggest difference?
Oh, it was a Japanese sencha, which most people revere. I mean, it's got a great taste. I love sencha. And then we tested it against Chinese jasmine tea, which those, they call them like dragon balls. They're the
Yeah.
teas rolled together with jasmine
Yeah.
flowers. So we tested either of those side by side in an angiogenesis assay, and surprise. It's a big surprise to me was that the Chinese tea was better than it, but more powerful, potent than
Mm-hmm.
the Japanese tea. But then when we actually mixed them to get the two together, we got actually an effect that was more powerful than either, and even more powerful than the black tea. And then if you kind of counted the potency, it was definitely synergy. Like they were more than additive. They actually did something yet different again. And so, you know, um, what's the impact on the growing conditions, or the soil from which they came, or the age, or the season in which the leaves are picked? All these are amazing questions that need to be asked.
When you did this study, did you figure out how much, what was like the optimal brewing and like consistency of the tea and how much someone would need to drink every day to maximize the benefits of drinking it?
Yeah, so the way I do food research, food as medicine research, is by looking at lots of different types of data, and lots of different types of studies. And the reason that's important is that you can't really study food in the exact same way you'd study a drug, right? You study a drug like a pharmaceutical. What do? You give 1,000 patients the drug, and you give another 1,000 patients a sugar pill or a placebo, and then you make them take that drug X number of times a day for a few months or maybe a year, and then you measure the outcome. Well, you can't make anybody just eat only tomatoes, and you can't make the other people not eat tomatoes, right? And so for a year, and so the ways that I approach the research is, number one, we look in the lab and we see in cells, and looking at the genetics and molecular biology, what does the food actually do, or the substance within the food? And this can be done, in tissue culture and genetic studies. It could be done with lab animals, animal models, um, all the standard stuff. Then you can go to clinicals in humans. And for humans, you can actually do a clinical trial. The cacao, the hot chocolate study I told you about, regenerative blood vessel cells, stem cells, was actually a human trial done with people. Small studies, because it's really difficult to do long-term studies like this. But then you have population studies where you can not just do a couple of dozen people, you can do hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people. In fact, some of the largest epidemiological studies, they call them population studies, can involve hundreds of thousands of people. There's a gigantic study in Europe that is looking at like 500,000 people. and across, I think, a dozen European countries, and studying them over the course of their lifetime. So uh, the conclusions that you get are really by converging all that data and then figuring out what does the data tell you. So we were talking about tea earlier when you were asking about the right dose. Well, many of the studies that have been done in humans have shown that tea benefits that protect the heart, protect against cancer, even protect against dementia. Any range anywhere from 2 to 4 cups of green tea a day. Most of the studies have been done in green tea, and uh, and then the question is, like what is so that would be the dose. And the question is, like, how long would you need to take it? Many of these studies are conducted over a period of years, looking at people's intake over the course of years. So this is, again, food isn't like a drug. You just go out to the drugstore and you pop a pill and you're done, or pop it once a day for seven to 10 days, like an antibiotic. This is why having a great habit when you're young can pay off later on in life, but it's never too old. It's never too late. You're never too old to actually, kind of shapeshift a little bit and lean towards what I like to say is a delicious, healthy diet that pleases you, that you love. And so in my book, I read about more than 200 foods, and they all activate one or more of the body's health defense systems, and everyone can find something that they love in that list of 200 plus foods. And if you start with the foods that you love as healthy choices, you're already way ahead of the game, because you're not about cutting out things you love, you're adding things to your diet that you love.
That makes total sense. I was amazed to learn about, uh, am I going to say this right? Angioneogenesis, or the compounds that prevent new blood vessels
uh,
growing to cancer.
yeah, so that's anti-angiogenic foods.
Right.
uh, and some of the really interesting ones are also surprises. I got involved in this many, many years ago. When there was a research paper that came out, I spied of it was done, it was a researcher, it was a Greek researcher doing research in Germany, and the lab had vials and vials and vials of frozen urine from Japanese villagers outside of Kyoto who all ate vegetarian diets, mostly soybean products. And they were and the laboratory was studying uh, female hormones, and obviously during menstruation, there are female hormones found in the urine, and that's what the lab was originally doing. And so they would, uh, so they had all this extra frozen urine around, and they were trying to figure out what type of experiments would be useful to do. So they decided they would just see what's in the urine, and not be uh, biased. So they looked at everything that was in the urine, and they found a couple of really interesting, surprising peaks. So think about urine. You put it into a device that can measure all the chemicals, and if there's a chemical, the needle jumps and you get a little spike in the readout. There's like the sticker tape that comes out in the readout there. Well, they found a couple of gigantic spikes, and they're like, what the heck is this? And it turns out they were not female hormones, but they were hormone-ish like, and they found that it was a phytoestrogen that comes from soy. Right, so we now know this. Okay, soy have phytoestrogens, and what they did though is they tested the chemical from the urine. They tested it on blood vessel cells, and they found that it potently shut down the blood vessels that tumors would grow to try to feed themselves. It was anti-angiogenic, cancer starving. Now, you say, wait a minute, we know that women are often told to stay away from soy products because the phytoestrogens are dangerous for breast cancer, right? Well, that's an urban legend. The urban legend is from well-intentioned people trying to interpret the information, is that soy estrogen, plant estrogens, look nothing like human estrogens. They're called estrogens, but they actually don't do the same thing. In fact, plant estrogens block human estrogens. We know that human estrogens can be responsible for some types of breast cancer, and in fact, we give blockers of human estrogen to treat those cancers. Turns out soy estrogens, phytoestrogens, do the same thing as those pharmaceuticals. They block the human estrogen. So how do we know that they're safe to actually, it's always safe to take? Well, a study of 5,000 women who already had breast cancer. So the highest risk women were studied. And this was a study done out of Shanghai called the Shanghai Women's Breast Cancer Study. It found that those women with breast cancer diagnoses who ate more soy had better outcomes, less mortality, and less chance of the cancer coming back the more they ate. How much soy do they need to have? About 10 grams of soy protein a day. That's the amount of soy you would get in about a glass of soy milk per day. Not that much. And so again, go to the lab, look what's in there, look at human samples and human trials, then like a big populations, and see, a study of 5,000 women is pretty convincing. You would think that if it's dangerous, you would see it right there. And then there was a meta-analysis of 14 different studies of women with breast cancer and studying the effects of soy. And in every single case of these 14 clinical trials, the intake of soy was associated with better survival, and in no case was the intake of soy associated with more mortality. So I think that's a case closed kind of thing.
Do you know, in those studies, did they choose non-GMO soy or organic soy, or did they differentiate what kind of soy they were using?
So that's a good question. Now, in those big studies, they haven't really differentiated those. And some of these studies are coming out of Asia, some of them are coming out of Europe. And so the big concern about GMO, the debate, the controversy about GMO is something that's really worthwhile studying. I'll tell you something interesting that came out recently that I discovered about GMO and about organic is that, you know, a lot of concepts of GMO being better, or sorry, being worse, and organic being better are all based on sort of the principles that they should be better or should be worse. And the real question is, how would you actually know? Well, you'd have to do the human studies, some of which are underway right now. So we have to wait and see what those research studies show. So far, what I would say is that for GMO, it's very, very difficult to avoid GMO anything because the seeds are out there. They butterflies and bees take them everywhere. And so even if you think something is not GMO, it may wind up being that the pollination has contaminated a non-GMO with a GMO. So the seeds that they started them with weren't that way. Really, really difficult studies. The other kind of thing that I got surprised with organic, and organic is supposedly better. And of course, nobody wants pesticides in their foods. But recently, there was a paper study published showing that strawberries that are grown in organic fashion, meaning without pesticides, actually have more healthful properties in the berry. And that's the reason is that when you don't have pesticides used to grow the strawberries, bugs eat the strawberry leaves. That's the whole point of pesticides, to keep the pests away. But when insects eat at the leaves of the plant views it as a wound to the plant, and it responds by actually healing itself. And part of the wound healing response is to put more bioactive stuff into the fruit. So you actually get a more powerful fruit when it's actually attacked by an insect.
Interesting.
So that's really interesting stuff, right?
And also, when you're eating food that isn't sterile and been harmed by these chemicals, when you're eating food like strawberries that has been grown in the most organic fashion, like let's say in your own backyard, when we eat the strawberry, we're consuming bacteria that live on the strawberry, and that bacteria helps our body to digest and assimilate the nutrients from that strawberry. And so I think that it's really good to eat a variety of raw and cooked foods if you can tolerate it. Some people with digestive problems can't, but if you can, eat a variety of fresh raw foods because it helps us to attach those to invite those good bacteria that are specific to those foods that help us to assimilate the nutrients. My biggest concern is glyphosate, which is Roundup. It's known as a chelator, and I've had a few people on the show about it. Dr. Stephanie Seneff has talked about how it binds to heavy metals and it releases the heavy metals when pH changes in the body, like blood to urine or blood to cerebrospinal fluid, and that they find that it deposits heavy metals into tissue in the body. And so we want to avoid Roundup or glyphosate as much as possible. I also had Jeffrey Smith on the show, who's a producer of documentaries around GMO, and he brought up a really interesting study. It's been a few years since I interviewed him, so I don't remember the exact title of it. But in Canada, they studied women and found that Bt toxin, that they actually had gut bacteria. They stopped eating GMO, but that their gut bacteria, the DNA of their gut bacteria, had been hijacked by the Bt corn. And so they believe that the DNA, that the genetically modified DNA of the corn then attacks our and hijacks our gut biome. And the gut biome was producing Bt toxin. So this is like when we're playing with the DNA of the foods we're eating. Like we have to wonder about the effects it'll have on our cells, but also the effects it'll have on the microbiome, which, as you've pointed out, is so important. So I totally agree with you. We're not 100%, we can never be 100% sure if the soy we're eating is non-GMO. If we could buy organic, hopefully there's no glyphosate in it. But very interesting what you've pointed out, that consuming healthy amounts of soy can help to prevent cancer, but also people with cancer benefit from it as well. Dr. Joel Furman talks about the importance of eating even just a cup of mushrooms a day and something like maybe a half a cup or a cup of onions a day, raw or cooked, uh, can increase the ability to prevent vasculature growing to new cancer. And that's like you said, if you eat a food that you like I love mushrooms and onions, so I make sure I eat them every day. But if we can pick foods that we like, that we enjoy, that also nutrify the body, then go for it and eat lots of variety of those healthy fruits and vegetables. I definitely want to make sure listeners get your book, Eat to Beat Disease. Your website is drwilliamlee.com. And of course, the links to everything that Dr. Lee does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. Do you do telemedicine? Do you work with people? Like what are the other ways that listeners can follow you, learn from you, and work with you?
Yeah, so one of the best ways is actually to sign up on my website, drwilliamlee.com, drwilliamlee.com. And actually, I'm going to be unrolling a new program where I'm actually able to help give out sort of the breaking news information, news you can use, tips on how you can actually live a better lifestyle. And one of the things that you can get definitely just by signing up is a free shopping list, because I've taken the 200 foods from my book and I've broken them down into generally the order that you might encounter them when you actually go into a grocery store. And these days, you don't want to waste any time in a grocery store. You want to get in there and get out like a SWAT team. So the more you can actually take a look at what the healthy stuff is, mark it off, check it out, make a list, get in your head, make a beeline for the parts that you want to get, and then get out of Dodge. That's something that, I really feel like a healthy food shopping list can be useful for. So that's how I encourage people to do it. I'm also on social at Dr. William Lee. Please follow along and like and spread the word, because, this is something so important in, the COVID era. This virus has been a big wake up call for the entire human species that our health is no longer about juicing, jogging, and yoga. It's about how we take care of ourselves every single day, and we make decisions when we eat that can really help make the difference between whether we can resist disease or whether we might succumb to it.
If everyone did a little bit of juicing, jogging, and yoga, I think this world would be a better place. Thank you so much for coming on the show. My last question for you is, I know you already eat a very healthy diet and you focus on a healthy lifestyle because you see the science behind it in preventing disease. What did you change in your diet and lifestyle in the last few months? And like, what did you encourage your family, your close loved ones to do because of the COVID pandemic?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that we're doing is getting enough vitamin C and vitamin D. Those are micronutrients that are found in many different types of foods like citrus or mushrooms that if you're deficient in, your immune system is more likely to fail to detect viruses. So I wanted to make sure that, at least for me, I'm actually getting up to snuff to baseline. And then some of the other foods that I started eating that really can enhance our immunity are things like I mentioned pomegranate juice. I started to have more tomatoes, which are a great source of vitamin C. I started really making sure I was eating tree nuts like pecans, which I really love, and olive oil, blueberries, and blackberries are really great. And actually, one of the things that I did is I actually did a little public service announcement on YouTube called 10 things you can eat, you should eat right now to beat COVID-19, and put it out there. And immediately it kind of started to go viral because people were just looking for information of what I would do to actually eat and what I've done. And so I put that out there, 10 things that you can eat to beat COVID-19 on YouTube. Subscribe and those are how I changed my life. And I'm happy to kind of continue to let people know what new things I'm actually doing as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. William Lee. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. You are welcome back anytime you want to come and teach and share. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Dr. Lee. Please share it with those you care about. Let's get this information out to help as many people as possible to learn true health. And come join the Facebook group. Search Learn True Health in Facebook or go to learntruehealth.com/group and join the Facebook group. It's a wonderful, supportive community. We're all in this together to learn what we can do to tweak our diet, our lifestyle, supplements, whatever we can do to just switch it over to build the body into a place that develops health instead of disease. We can heal the body. The body has an amazing ability to heal itself. Even if you've been told you're going to have this for the rest of your life, I have met so many people, myself included, who have reversed diseases and illnesses that they were told by doctors they'd always have for the rest of their life. So don't give up hope. Instead, dive in. Listen to more episodes of the Learn True Health podcast. Come join the Facebook group. There is hope. As long as you're living and breathing, as long as you have a pulse, your body can heal itself. You can do many things to support your body's ability to heal itself. And I'm so happy that you're here to learn how you can optimize your health through every meal, through every breath. There's so many things you can do mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and energetically. And that's exactly what this podcast is here to help you with. So please dive in, keep listening. Make sure that you share this episode and share the podcast with those you love so we can help as many people as possible. And come join the Facebook group so that you can keep learning and keep asking questions and keep growing. Thank you so much for being a listener. Thank you so much for sharing. And have yourself a fantastic rest of your day.